Throughout the years, publishers and developers have come and gone. Some made it to legendary status, while others flew under the general public's radar, but still managed to build cult followings. One such company, Vic Tokai, tried to replicate the best with often questionable results. Not all was bad. These are those games and their stories. Platform gaming. The fast, twitchy reaction, often rage-inducing genre that this game reviewer can't get enough of. There are more than 20 beloved titles I can name offhand that define the genre. There are times I come across one that, for one reason or another, I want to like, but I can't. And the Creon Conquest is at the top of that list. Allow me to explain. Area 1 does a great job of teaching the player how to use all the magic. Yeah, instead of unlocking powers like in Mega Man, you have it all from the start. No! So what they do is they set up situations to naturally teach you the function of each and how they'll be used. It's in the later half of the game you throw all those spells out of the window in lieu of just coasting through them with the broom. Outside of Area 1, there are no traps that require the freeze spell or anything, and the whole system just feels like a half-baked idea. Since none of the spells have a cost or take some sort of charge, there's nothing punishing you for pushing your way through the relentless barrage. Oh yeah, the constant dying. Anytime you die, it results in an instant game over. No continues are given to the player or can be earned. The Creon Conquest demands perfection from the player. Let me just take the time to mention that health drops are extremely rare. So here we have just another platforming game where your aim is locked down and you need to avoid enemies that come at you from all angles. Answerless! If you manage to make it to the end of an area, you'll go up against one of the game's bosses. These fights are a breath of fresh air. Learning the patterns and how to utilize the spells for each wave of attacks fires off the same sparks in your brain as fighting a boss in Mega Man. I want to like this game. Listen, it's not all bad. Some of the stages are rather enjoyable, just not crafted with the same love as other games that I'm not going to keep saying the name of. Get this! The Creon Conquest in Japan is called Magical Doropi. It features a full-fledged story, cutscenes in between stages, the death of a character, and, well, you can continue after a game over, which is the most important part. Was this, like, a result of artificial lengthening due to rentals? Probably. So I don't suggest picking up this game, not North American copy at least. If you must play it, either import the Japanese version or, like, find a way to load up the translation patch, or maybe buy a reproduction card or something, I don't know.
In the days of the NES, games with big fleshed out stories were kind of a rarity. Most games relied on a paragraph or two of badly written text and an instruction manual to let players know what the game was all about, and half the time no one paid any attention to it and just dove right in. But then there were games like Ninja Gaiden and Double Dragon 2, which used in-game cutscenes to help bring a bit of cinematic quality to the 8-bit video games. The same year that both those games were released, Vic Tokai brought gamers Golgo 13 Top Secret Episode. I've only played this game a few times, and never for very long. It never really interested me much. I figured I'd give it another go to help old Reverse Michael. It starts with a pretty sweet cutscene where a chopper blows up over a city skyline. Then Duke Togo, aka Golgo 13, appears on screen with his signature M16. Once the game starts, a cutscene involving the hero in an airport plays, with a woman telling Duke that someone tried to frame him for blowing up a helicopter that was carrying some kind of virus. Golgo 13 then sets off in the streets of East Berlin to try and solve the mystery. The graphics during main gameplay are not great. They're serviceable, but they stand out, and not in a good way. Sometimes you're required to enter buildings, but there really isn't any indication that you can enter them. The game just looks like a mess when you're actually playing it, and the gameplay, well, it's not terrible, but it's not necessarily great either. In the main gameplay mode, you move Golgo on a side-scrolling stage, avoiding or killing various KGB agents that shoot at you. In some of these cities, it's kind of funny that there are civilians walking around and not panicking when the KGB agents and Golgo just start shooting at each other. Occasionally, you'll see a gun shoot up from the bottom of the screen and warp you to a first-person shooter segment where Golgo has to take out various acrobatic enemies as well as things like helicopters with small arms. That's pretty manly. Occasionally, you'll have to control Golgo through water levels and first-person mazes as well as a horizontally scrolling shooter level. The game has a lot of different gameplay modes, but it doesn't do anything well. They're all adequate and very playable, but the game gets pretty boring quickly, and later levels get stupid difficult because of lack of decent control you have over your character. Duke Togo moves very slowly, so it's hard to avoid things like these bazooka flamethrower weapons, or even the most basic of enemies. I didn't even make it halfway through the game before I decided I was done with it. That being said, it's not a bad game, it's just a boring one. You may have a different experience, and if you grew up playing Top Secret Episode, you may even have some fond memories of it. The problem is that Golgo's first outing on the NES didn't age as well as so many other games on the console, and there are a good many others that do the whole multiple genre thing way better. My recommendation is to skip it if you haven't played it before. Sorry, Duke.
Despite sounding like some kind of generic Jean-Claude Van Damme movie title, Time Slip is actually a 1993 run-and-gun Super NES game, developed by Sales Curve Interactive and published by Vic Tokai. The story is a convoluted, messy mix of sci-fi meets Bill and Ted, with players taking on the role of Dr. Vincent Gilgamesh in the year 2145 AD. A group of scientists discover a rip in the space-time continuum at the same time an alien race called the Tematians. However, within 2 years, the aliens plan to take over Earth with this portal. The good doctor decides to take the aliens out, however, everyone but him gets killed by the aliens. So he takes the time-traveling device that they've created, and, well, the result is this game. Time Slip controls like a sluggish Contra 3 The Alien Wars. However, the Doctor doesn't move as quickly as Bill and Lance do. You get only one type of gun that can be leveled up with the collectibles that are picked up, but you lose the levels when you die. Jumping with the B button, everything feels a bit floaty, and you never really feel like you can manipulate where you want to go. It's almost as if something is holding your character back. Firing your weapon feels mostly right with the ability to shoot almost anywhere, but still, it just doesn't feel as tight as it should be. There's other weapon pickups that can be grabbed and toggled through with the L and R buttons, and by pressing X they can be fired. My issue with these, though, is that they always only fire in a left or right direction depending on which way you're pointing, and never in the direction your gun is facing. For example, if trying to aim up at an enemy and pressing X, it just fires left or right. There's a multicolored shield that can be picked up, but I couldn't tell if the color changes were representative of how much power the shield had or not. Levels and environments have decent designs, forests, caverns, castles, and more, but the enemy designs were just a hodgepodge of generic enemies that didn't really feel engaging or dynamic. There's also times where you feel like a hitbox should be present when firing at an enemy, but you actually have to get directly in its line of sight to defeat it, such as these cannons that I'm very clearly hitting, but not really. Like, come on, that's just silly. I will give compliments to most of the music. The first level's track gives a sci-fi prog rock vibe, but other than that, there's only a handful of tracks that really impressed me. You get a set amount of lives with no continues, and in games like Running Guns, I feel like that's a bit ridiculous. It's pretty clear that this is just designed to artificially increase the difficulty. It just makes me want to live up to the standards that the game's name lays out. Time to slip something else into my Super Nintendo. I hate to be so hard on the game, but this just feels like too little, too late. I expected better out of the Super NES. Maybe if this was on the NES it would have been okay, but here, it just doesn't stand out in any capacity. Come on, Vic Tokai, you're better than that. So if you're okay with just playing another run and gun that will make you want to play something way superior like Jim Power or Contra 3, go for it. But just so you know, you're in for a bit of a grind.
I love the Shinobi series. These two games in particular. I feel Shadow Dancer is the best of the original slow-paced style of the Shinobi games. But Shinobi 3 picks things up with the ability to double jump, run, wall jump, and even block incoming shurikens. It's truly a masterpiece for the Sega, and what I thought was the pinnacle of the series' 2D roots. They tried their hand at adapting the game to 3D, and to be fair, those entries were met with a generally positive reception. Sadly, the idea was never revisited. In 2011, Sega would try rebooting the franchise exclusively on the 3DS with a game simply called Shinobi. The development was handled by Kryptonite Games, and honestly, it was a game I remember having fun with. Not something I would write home about though. But in between Shinobi 3 and the game's first 3D outing was a little gem I hadn't heard about on the Sega Saturn, Shinobi Legions. This game almost didn't get a US release. Sega of America didn't feel that it was worthy of publishing. This baby only made it to American shores because of one company, Vic Tokai. They probably noticed that the game received overall good reviews and jumped at the chance to make a few bucks off the license. Oddly enough, Sega of Europe did publish the game, but under the name Shinobi X with a few changes, but now I'm getting ahead of myself. What could have been so bad that Sega of America banished it? For starters, the game sports digitized sprites, which we all know never age well. I'm sure they weren't concerned with future-proofing the game though. Despite the dated look, things blend together really nicely, and after some exposure, you won't even notice. That's particularly due to the fact that Shinobi Legions is a ton of fun to play. The controls are fantastic. No longer are shuriken, sword attack, and block mapped to the same button. In prior games, you'd have to get as close to an enemy as possible to engage in melee combat, or deplete your shurikens. In Revenge of Shinobi, you can only block when you pick up the POW icon, and in Shinobi 3, you'd have to hit and hold the attack button. This often meant wasting one of your shurikens. So having this split up across multiple buttons is simply a blessing and leaves gameplay feeling as smooth as butter. It also allows our hero to react much better. Speaking of hero, who's behind the mask this time? Our new hero is the ninja Sho. In short, he needs to save his sister Aya from their evil brother Kazuma. There is a lot more to the story, mostly displayed through awesome FMV cutscenes replicating old action movies. These things are cheesy and more than likely the only reason this game was slapped on a disc. There's cheesy bass lines, cheap effects, hokey acting, and people flying through boxes. This is what I'm talking about. Man, the cutscenes are awesome. Just give me a whole movie of that right there. On the other hand though, the stage design in Shinobi Legions doesn't try to cut too high. Much like previous games, there is a ton of ninjas trying to out-ninja your ninja. Levels pretty much play the same. You do a ton of platforming and killing, fight a boss, and you move on. What more do you need? It's just good simple fun. The one stage that kind of killed the flow for me is the underground cave. This whole section is on a minecart with some of that classy force scrolling that we all love. And you know, I wouldn't have a problem if the double jump wasn't so damn hard to pull off consistently. I just kept falling into the water and then eventually ran out of continues, which sucks because everything was smooth sailing. Sure, I could have used the stage select code, but that shouldn't be necessary. Point aside, I had enough fun with Shinobi Legions that I actually want to add it to my collection, but which version do I add? As I mentioned before, Sega of Europe made some changes before publishing. They deemed the soundtrack for the game to be mediocre and uninspired, so they opted in a soundtrack more akin to Yuzo Koshira's earlier work on Revenge of Shinobi. The new songs were composed by Sega veteran Richard Jacques. His music is featured in over 10 different games from the company, including some unfavorable ones. Here's a little comparison of the difference between the tracks on one stage.
Released for the Game Boy in September 1991, Aerostar is a horizontal shoot-'em-up where you control the titular ship through 7 stages, blasting all enemies in your way to fight that stage's boss.
There is a story about how the Earth is uninhabitable after World War VI, and an intergalactic council decrees that the planet could be livable once more, sending people there to clean it up. However, mutants who have prospered there decide that it's their world, so they interfere with the cleaning process and they send the Aerostar to stop them. Now that we got that pesky plot out of the way, on with how the game actually plays. At first glance, Aerostar is your basic shooter. You fly upward, dodging enemies' bullets and collecting power-ups for your ship. 5 total in Aerostar, which consist of a shield, laser that can split in 2 directions, missiles, drones that destroy anything they touch, and everyone's favorite, the spread shot, which will be your best choice to hit all enemies. Or you could try dodging them. The big gimmick here is the ship's jump jets. Your ship can't move over any gaps or holes in the ground, so in order to pass them, you hold the A button to hover jump over them. But be careful, as you can't fire your weapons while hovering. On top of that, the jump is limited, so if you don't land to recharge it, you'll fall to your death. This is actually where most of the game's challenge comes from, timing your jump so you don't run into a bunch of enemies that can take you down fast. That and not having a shadow, making it hard to see if you're landing on a platform or to your death. Thankfully though, controlling the Aerostar is just as easily as most shooters at that time. Visually, Aerostar is pretty nice for a Game Boy title. The levels are nicely detailed and the ships are big enough to not blend in with the background, although there is a bit of slowdown due to how many sprites can get on screen. For audio, the music's alright, but nothing spectacular, and the sound effects are ear-grating, which is always a nice thing. Aerostar is a game that won't blow you away, but it's still a fun little romp on the go, especially with the challenge of jumping over gaps and enemy bullets. If you see it out in the wild for cheap, pick it up, it's not too bad.
If the ingenious title doesn't say it all, Troubleshooter is obviously, well, a shooter. Originally titled Battle Mania in Japan, Troubleshooter stars 2 teenage hotties armed with guns. Sounds like a great game already, doesn't it? Madison and Crystal are teenage mercenary badasses hired to rescue Prince Abu or some shit, and are equipped with an arsenal to decimate an entire army. And that's what it's going to take for these adolescent heroines to blast their way through a futuristic setting saturated with baddies in what looks like a manga/anime come to life. Madison and Crystal are BFFs and are practically joined at the hip. You control Blondie Madison, while Crystal mirrors Madison's every move. While Madison can only fire to the right, Crystal has the ability to turn around and, while ass to ass with her bestie, attack from behind. Enemies approach from all sides, so firing from both ends is essential in earning that sweet, sweet merc cash. While Crystal is impervious to damage, Madison is not, and getting the two confused while trying to evade enemy fire unfortunately becomes commonplace and is a nuance that you'll have to adapt to. But it's by far a deal breaker. At the beginning of each stage, you have the choice of selecting from 4 different special weapons. These weapons can be used as long as the charge meter is full, which automatically replenishes itself over time after every use. Several regular weapons can also be obtained and powered up to make a trauma-plagued teenage life seem a bit less catastrophic. You only have 1 life, and each hit of damage will reduce your energy by 1 unit. Each unit is basically a life. The music is fast-paced with some killer percussion, and even some strange Akira-like tunes that totally complements the insanity that Troubleshooter throws in your face. It also shares the same fanfare from another Vic Tokai classic, Decap Attack. The aesthetics are also attractive and tosses in some goofiness for good measure. The game is fairly short with only 6 stages, but this shooter will without a doubt test your skills, as this one is no walk in the park. It's really no surprise that Troubleshooter didn't do that well here in the States. Like many titles before it, Troubleshooter fell victim to Americanized artwork, which more or less resembles the cover art to some cheesy 60s sci-fi show. Judging from the artwork, I wouldn't want this game on the shelf touching my other Genesis titles either, but in reality, the game is outstanding and a must-play for fans of the genre. Troubleshooter will undoubtedly erect the ephebophile that would otherwise lie dormant in any male middle-aged gamer.
This is one of those games I played a ton of when I was a kid. Now, I don't know what happened to the cartridge, it just sort of vanished like things tend to do when you're younger, right? That wasn't just me. Socket, or Time Dominator First as it's known in Japan, is often considered a Sonic clone. It features a blue duck who wears red and white shoes and he runs fast. Aside from that, I really don't see it. Even the stage layouts seem nothing like they are in Sonic. The worlds are split up into 3 zones. Each one is a bit different than the last. The first zone is generally straightforward. You run through, gather all the electricity bolts, and you charge the time machine? Yeah, there's this crazy story about going back in time and creating some sort of paradox, but it really doesn't matter here. So instead of rings like Sonic, the health bar ties into energy pickups, and kinda feeds into the whole idea of socket and gives the collectibles meaning. When the health bar hits red, it starts to alert the player of low health, at the same time making their ears bleed. You know, for a game trying to copy the Sonic format, it doesn't promote a sense of speed. Sure, you can run fast, but the game loves to place enemies on the path or just block the player from making it up certain ramps. I mean, it is a video game, so there should be enemies, but this wouldn't be a problem in Sonic. All you had to do was roll into a ball. Here, you need to hope your kick attack lands. Best to take it nice and slow with this one, to be honest. The other areas in the game are steeped in platforming goodness. This is where the similar stage designs pop up. Moving platforms, stage hazards, and multiple layers with more than one path to finish a stage. It really doesn't skirt the obvious inspiration from Sonic's design. Yeah, look at those layers and layers of parallax scrolling. Maybe this is really just a big Sonic clone now that I'm breaking it down. I can see it now. The bright neon colors, tons of attitude with rad shoes, and a mascot that runs fast, and it's only on the Sega Genesis! A big thanks to Brazzle the Gamer for his Golgo 13 segment, and to Mike Tendo for coming in hot with his Time Slip segment. The Dolly Popka for always contributing to my projects, this time with his Aerostar segment. And of course, Wes Topo for always being down to collaborate. This man is like my other angry brother. Links to their channels in the description. Without them, this video wouldn't have been as colorful and varied as it was. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to help out, try sharing this video on your favorite social media outlets to let others know. Or you can support me through Patreon and financially help the channel grow beyond my wildest dreams. No matter what, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.